Good morning. Welcome to Maynard Costerson's Sage Intacct latest product update and new features webinar. Today, we will provide insight into vendor approval updates, purchasing price matching, and how the product is expanding beta for list enhancements. These new updates and features will help save time and money when running day-to-day processes for your business. A few housekeeping items for everyone. This session is being recorded and you are all muted. So if you do have any questions, please type them in the chat. We may have some time at the end to answer your questions. With that out of the way, I would like to welcome Wes Salisbury to today's session. Wes is a senior manager in the firm's business solution and technology department. With nearly 10 years of experience as an accountant and technology specialist, he offers a unique perspective, having served the role he now supports. As a Sage Intacct expert, Wes works closely with his clients to ensure successful software implementations that help them achieve their goals. So thank you for taking the time today to share your knowledge. Wes, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yep, you're very welcome. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you're tuning into. So today is super exciting. We are going to be talking about Sage Intacct's 2023 Release 3. For the third quarter. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here. And I am going to go back and forth between presenting Sage Intacct, the actual product, as well as a presentation I have. So let's just go ahead and toggle between these. All right, so again, I always like to keep these type of webinars free-flowing. If you have questions, just ask. Even if it's just semi-related to the topic at hand, feel free to ask. So without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it. So a little bit of the background on today's presentation. So as I said before, we are talking about Release 3. So Release 3 did go live on August 18th. So we are a little bit behind in getting this presentation out. But yet, on the other hand, it's also given us time to have any change, maybe post-launch changes to be made. Because Intacct will sometimes make adjustments after a release. And it's also given us a good chance to get feedback from clients on some of the new features as well. So that feedback is incorporated as part of this presentation. But like what was mentioned earlier, some of the major new features as part of this last release. Number one, probably applicable to everyone here in the webinar, is vendor approvals. So we're going to go through each one of these in detail. So I'm not going to discuss too much of each of these right now. But vendor approvals, that's the major new feature. Purchasing price and quantity match tolerancing. That's effectively just making sure that you are getting billed for the stuff that you received. And there's some cool features with diagnosing why that may be the case. So we'll be discovering a little bit of that. And then finally, just list view enhancements. You may have already seen some of those so far, but Intacct is consistently adding more and more records and objects where those views are now available. And since we are getting this out a little bit on the late side, I will be giving you all kind of a sneak peek at Release 4, which just released this last Friday on the 10th. I'm not gonna, this session isn't designed to go into detail on each and everything that has been released as part of that. Because we're going to do another one of these and we want content for that. And we want feedback from clients. We want to gather feedback from clients on those new features and incorporate that into that presentation. But we will be talking about some of the stuff to get you interested about the most recent release. All right, so for starters, we have vendor approvals. And pretty much what vendors approvals are is it gives you the ability to enforce that vendors are being reviewed whenever a new vendor is created or an existing vendor is being edited, excuse me. And really, traditionally, a few of you on the call, we may have worked together in years past to come up with a little custom doodad to do this for us, because in those days, Intacct didn't have a native solution for it. So you may have worked with me to come up with a few smart events and smart rules to kind of mimic this, but this native solution is a whole lot more robust than what we had put together. And I would suggest that if you're using that customization, to certainly consider this. So pretty much with vendor approvals, since it requires that a new vendor or an existing vendor has to be approved anytime one is created or edited, it really helps reduce the risk of fraud in the sense of if someone goes in, someone has ability to change vendor setup. Someone can theoretically go into a vendor and say, oh, hey, I'm going to change the name of maybe the print as name of a vendor to a friend's name or my name. Or you can change the bank account number to go to a bank account number that you have access to. Again, that's one of those things that can happen in the control environment. You want to think about ways to mitigate fraud, and that's certainly a good way of going about it. But outside of just reducing the risk of fraud, it really helps you just increase the overall accuracy of your vendors and their setup. So enforcing reviews of vendors really allows you to make sure that if a vendor should be set up as a 1099 vendor, that everything is set up appropriately there. Does the vendor have the right set of address fields? Is it marked as taxable, or is it related to, or does it have ACH set up for it at all? So it really gives you the ability to really have control over all the new vendors that are being created and all the existing vendors that are being edited. All right. So this feature is enabled under the accounts payable module configuration screen. So in the image to the upper left of my screen, that is, if you go to the setup tab in accounts payable, go to configuration, there is a little area that says, do you want to enable vendor approvals? And then do you also want to enable notifications? So that option is there. If you're an administrator, if you're not an administrator, you won't see that. So if you're interested in using this feature and you're not an admin, talk to your admin. But when you do decide to switch on this feature, it's typically recommended that you do so after hours or when people aren't actively using the system. And the main reason for that is when you are what happens is when you switch this feature on, Intacct is looping through all of your vendors in the background and approving them programmatically. And if you have a lot of vendors, that will take time. And during that time, you can't, while it's going through that approval process, you can't add or edit new vendors. I'm pretty sure you can't pay bills during that time. It pretty much locks you out of the ability to do anything in accounts payable. But from my experience so far, for most clients, it only takes about 5 minutes for it to finish. But in the event where you maybe have tens of thousands or high 5 figures worth of vendors, it may take a little while. So just bear in mind that it's going to take a little moment to do that. And then finally, when you're enabling this feature, you do need to give yourself permissions to approve vendors before enabling. So even if you're a super user, administrator, you have every permission in the book, when Intacct releases new permissions, you need to go into your role setup and give yourself permissions to that. So you just don't automatically get every single permission as an administrator. You need to assign it through your roles. But with that being said, if you try to enable this feature when you yourself don't have permissions to approve vendors, it'll just say, hey, you don't have the ability to do this. But once you give yourself access to it, it will then allow you to proceed. All right. And approvers, the people who can approve vendors, these are assigned by way of the accounts payable permissions. So as I sort of alluded to before, when you set up a user and give a user roles or permissions, there's a little permission under accounts payable that says approve vendors. Pretty much, if you give that permission to someone, that person can approve vendors. There's nothing fancy with approving vendors as of today with, it's not getting routed based on what state the vendor is in. It's not getting routed based on how much you spend with that vendor. It's just, can you approve a vendor or can you not? So that actually makes assignment of duties super simple there. So this is one of the perks of getting some feedback from clients who have started this process. Because one of the things that we found out after this had released was even if you're a super user, even if you're an administrator with every single approval policy in the book, if you go in and create a vendor or edit an existing vendor, you cannot also be the person who approves it. So even if I'm a super user, admin user, if I go in and edit a user, I can't just turn right back around and approve that vendor. I need to wait for someone else to approve it. Now, this may be inconvenient if you are deciding whether to use this in your organization, but from a control standpoint, from an auditability standpoint, that's kind of a key control, right? Because even an administrator shouldn't be exempt from getting their vendors approved and reviewed by someone else. All right, just a couple more of these and then I'll get into a small demonstration. But while a vendor is in an unapproved state, the only thing you can do with it is create draft bills and draft transactions. So I can't go in and post a bill against a vendor pending approval. I can't pay a bill of a vendor pending approval. I can't book a purchase order for a vendor who needs approving. So I'm pretty much locked out of the ability to post anything regarding this vendor. But again, I can save those bills and transactions as draft, which I can then go in and post and process once the vendor has been approved. And finally, this is one of the key features that the current customization that some of you may be using doesn't have. So just like with approving or declining things like bills or POs and requisitions and things like that, when you approve or decline a vendor, those approvals and declines, as well as any comments, are stored as part of the audit trail. So this is super useful for auditing purposes down the line. So your auditors show up to your office or they get engaged with you and they ask, well, hey, show me where this vendor was approved at first. You can go to that vendor record and say, okay, I'm going to pull open the audit trail for this vendor. This person created it. This person approved it. These were all the comments that that person left as part of it. So there's a ton of functionality there. Great auditability. Again, Intacct is a great to audit. Tracks before and after changes, all that. And this is just a continuation of that. So that concludes that tab. Again, I'm going to kind of go between my browser and my browser and my PowerPoint presentation. Are there any questions in the queue that we need to address so far, or are we just going to address those later?
No questions at this time.
No questions? All right. Again, if there's any questions, just feel free to let us know. All right. Oh, and by the way, you can kind of see here, I just got a little pop-up about that list enhancements here. So if you see little videos like this, feel free to watch them, but I already watched it, so I'll say got it. All right, so pretty much, like I said before, the place where I go to set up this functionality is I go to Setup underneath Accounts Payable, and I go to Configuration. Again, if you're not some type of administrator in your organization, you're not going to have access to this. So again, don't be concerned if you're a regular user and you don't see it. All right, I think I scrolled down too far. Nope, that's wrong. I didn't scroll down far enough. My apologies. So just right by the bill approval settings, there is a vendor approval settings area. And there's really not much configuration to really do here. It's pretty much a checkbox that asks, do you want to enable vendor approval? And then do you also want to email notifications when someone has a vendor to approve? And at this point, I've already enabled things here, so it's not going to ask me. But when I check these boxes, it's essentially going to warn me and say, hey, you may want to consider doing this after hours just because there's an offline process that needs to run that's going to prevent you from doing stuff with accounts payable. But in this case, I already enabled those features. And pretty much the main thing that happens here is once I have that functionality enabled, I can go into accounts payable then, go into my vendors, and I can say, all right, I'm going to edit Adam and Frost LLC, for instance. And right now, this vendor is in an approved state, so I can use this vendor for whatever I need it for. But if I go in and make any change, if I go in and change the country, change the name slightly, even if I add new information without changing existing information, it's going to flag that vendor as submitted, that it needs approval because someone touched it, someone may have made changes. Just to test this out, I'm going to go ahead and just say, for address line 2, I'm going to use kind of a fictitious fraud example. So 123 Fake Street. I go in and change the address, but again, this would be for any change. If I went and changed the URL, the address, the email address, if I changed the ACH setup, it would require it to be approved. So let me go ahead and just hit submit, which nowadays, when you don't have vendor approvals enabled, it just says save. So let's go ahead and hit submit. So as you can see here, that vendor is now moved into a state of submitted. So while it's in a state of submitted, I can't go in and post a bill for this vendor at all. If I go in and try to create a bill and I say, all right, I want to code this bill to Adam and Frost, it's going to yell at me and say, hey, this vendor is in a submitted state. You can't post the transaction until the vendor is approved. And the only option it gives me is the option to draft transactions. Doesn't give me the ability to post transactions, submit transactions for approval, not anything like that. All right, so let's go ahead and, so like I said before, even though I'm a super user in this demo environment, since I was the one who submitted that vendor for approval, if I go into accounts payable and go under approved vendors, it's blank. I can't see it because I can't be the person who approves something that I modified. But if I go in as this other tab, where I'm logged in as Carla and not myself, and if I go into accounts payable and approved vendors, I see this vendor that I just modified as well as this one that I modified earlier. So I can go in and say, I can go in and view this one that I just put in here for processing. But let me go ahead and view this other one that I have staged up from earlier, just because there's a little something I want to show you. So when the person doing the approval of these vendors wants to figure out what exactly was changed, when they're viewing the vendor, all you have to do is go into more actions and then click on view audit trail. So on this one, I didn't make any changes to this one. I just saved it without making any changes. But you can see here that if I did make a change, it would show up as like this field used to be this, now it's this, and it would show me. And then I can approve or decline that vendor. And then I can leave a comment just like I can do with approving bills or approving purchasing transactions and those things. All right, now that those vendors have been approved by Carla, I go back and tab over to myself. And if I go into my vendors, I can now see that those vendors I was just looking at, those are now both approved. Since they're both approved, if I go into accounts payable and try to put in a bill, if I try to put in a bill for that same Adam and Frost vendor that I just tried inputting a bill for a moment ago, it no longer tells me that it's in a submitted state. I have the ability to not just draft a bill, but also submit it for approval and get it posted and paid and all that. So one thing of note, and then I'll pause for questions again, and I'll move on to something else if there aren't any questions. But note that earlier when I set up this option, it asked me if I wanted to set up email for emails to get sent out notifying people that there's stuff for them to approve. Not only do you have to check that box, but you also have to have your individual approver users opt in to getting emails in that way. So if you set up someone to be a vendor approver and you want to make sure they get emails, you would just, you can do this on their behalf too, but you want the end users to go up and click on their names up in the upper right hand corner of the screen here, click My Preferences, and then once that loads, I can scroll down to the bottom and find, or scroll down a little bit, and it's asking me for requests for approval. And if I check this box for vendor, it's pretty much me saying I opt into receiving approval requests via email for vendors. But you also have independent controls for purchasing, AP bills, journal entries, payment requests, stuff like that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just pause for a moment before we move on to something else. Do we have any questions in the queue at all?
No, no questions.
All right, no questions. All right. All right. Again, vendor approvals, that's a really neat feature that I think everyone here could potentially use. So it's part of core. Feel free to turn it on. And if you have any questions, just let us know. All right. So the next feature that I thought was a major release as part of this release is purchasing price and quantity tolerance in the purchasing module. So the main point of this new feature is that during the conversion process, like converting a receiver to an invoice or a purchase requisition into a purchase order, it checks for percentage variances in quantity and or price, or unit price, I should say. And it pretty much, if a transaction that you post is outside the acceptable tolerance range that you define, then Intacct flags it as a potential exception. And it allows someone to go in and review it and post it and pretty much figure out what the deal was with it. So it is enabled under the purchasing module configuration screen. So pretty much you go under the purchasing module and then you go to the setup tab and then you click on the configuration button there. And again, you need to be an administrator. So if you don't see it, it just means you're not an admin. But as I mentioned before, it has independent percent thresholds for both quantity and unit price. There may be some instances where it's super important to validate on quantity, like converting a receiver to an invoice, where maybe you should have no tolerance for converting a receiver to an invoice because you should only ever get invoiced for the exact number of pieces that you purchased. So that may be less tolerable than, say, converting a transaction from a requisition to an order. Maybe you're not as concerned about quantity variances at that point. But in any case, you have full control over it. You can assign it to certain transaction types in your purchasing model, all that good stuff. And you can book variances to a dedicated GL account, like I'm doing here in my setup here in the upper right. Or you can just absorb the amount of the difference, of the tolerance difference, into whatever it is you purchased. So in practice, I would have to imagine that most of the time, if you have a price variance of 25%, let's just say, and you bought a whole bunch of office supplies with it, you're probably going to post that overage to office supplies on a normal basis, because if you're paying extra for office supplies, it doesn't matter if it exceeded your tolerance, it's still office supplies. But with that being said, your mission may be, your objective as part of this may be to determine why you have these price variances to begin with, right? So that's what the setup that I have right here indicates. So I have a specialized expense account that tracks my my match tolerance differences, so I can review that activity at the end of the month to figure out, well, why am I getting these variances to begin with? So that may be a diagnostic tool that you can then use. But like I said before, you can kind of pick and choose which transaction types get validated. You don't need to, it's not an all or nothing deal. Even if you have 10 transaction types, you can only have validation against one if you wanted, or all of them. And again, with differing quantity and price percent tolerance differences. One thing of note is that this functionality is not today available with clients that are set up to have backorder transactions be created. So just an example of this would be, let's just say you have a purchase order for 100 pieces of something. You get an invoice for 50 of them, and the idea is your current configuration creates a back order for the 50 that you haven't yet received. Now, this feature isn't available in organizations set up like that. However, if you're interested in using this tool, using this feature, and you do have back orders enabled, let's talk about it. Let's talk some options, and maybe we can make some tweaks and concessions there. But if you try to do this yourself and you have back orders in your purchasing configuration, then it's gonna throw you an error. All right. So just like with vendor approvals, you have the ability to override or approve these exceptions purely based on permissions. So just like with the vendor approvals, all it is just a single checkbox. Can a user approve vendors or can they not? Same deal here. Can this user or a set of users approve an exception, or can they not? It's an all or nothing type of deal. It's a yes or no kind of master switch. So again, it makes it really simple to give certain people permissions to do this. And again, just like with the vendor approval concept, transactions that have been flagged as having exceptions, they're effectively drafts. They're unposted. You can't pay them. You can't convert them into other documents. They don't show up in most of your reports. So they're pretty much drafts, and someone has to go in and override the exception before you can do anything with them. And if you look at the second image off to the right, when you go into the edit screen for a transaction that has an exception noted, it gives you that big button that says override this. So that's the main thing that you see in the interface for that feature. All right. And again, the audit trail shows when and by whom exceptions are overridden by. So again, a good audit trail feature. If someone approves of an exception of this tolerance overage, it shows in the audit trail. And if you need to provide any documentation or proof of like this is where this was approved, it's right there for you to see. All right. Question check. Any questions at all so far before I proceed?
No questions.
No? Okay. Perfect. All right. Moving back into my Intacct screen here. Let's go ahead and navigate over to purchasing. And like I said before, the place where you go to configure this and get this enabled is you go to purchasing, setup tab, and configuration. And if you scroll down a bit, there's an area for enable match tolerances. So all you got to do is check that. And then it opens up this little area right here where you can then link what transaction definitions you want to validate on, what your quantity tolerance percent is, what your price tolerance percent is. And like I said before, if your main goal as part of this is to figure out why you're getting these price variances to begin with, you may want to consider setting up a dedicated GL account to hold that activity. But in the event where you wanted to just absorb all of the additional costs into whatever it is you're purchasing, just leave it blank. If you leave it blank, and if you buy $100 worth of office supplies and your vendor charges you $150 for them, that extra $50 will get booked to office supplies as well. So there's that. There's where you go to configure it. And now to actually see how this works, let's go ahead and go under purchasing, and we'll go to all, and everyone has a different purchasing configuration. Each one of you on the call, if you're using purchasing, each and every one of you has a unique setup. So this isn't tailored to exactly what you guys have. But we'll go ahead and go under purchasing, and I'll go to my purchase order, and I'm going to convert a purchase order into a vendor invoice so that we can see what happens when the vendor charges me more than what I ordered. So we'll go ahead and pick on Adam and Frost again here. I have this PO sitting out here for Adam and Frost. If I go in and edit this, if I go out and edit this vendor, I'm not vendor, sorry. If I go out and edit this purchase order, I can see that I am buying something, quantity of 10 for a price of $1 a piece. So low dollar value stuff, but it still serves to illustrate the point. So I'm going to trigger the unit price match tolerance to be exceeded. So in my setup, I only am allowing for a 5% overage. But what I'm going to do, and I'll cancel out of here, is I'm going to convert this into a vendor invoice. And when I do that, the thing I'm going to do is, despite the fact of me issuing a purchase order to this vendor for $1 a piece of whatever it is I'm buying, I'm going to say, oh, it's going to be $1.25 instead. So $1.25, still a quantity of 10, but now my extended price is $12.50 and not the $10 that I had earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and post this. And I forgot to put in my document number. That was my bad. All right. So what happens here is I posted that bill. Again, I have full admin privileges. I'm like the super approver here. But despite that fact, it shows up in a state of exception. So I see it in a state of exception. I can't convert it into anything. It hasn't posted anywhere. It's not on my financial statements, and it's in none of my reports. I can't pay it. I can't do anything with it besides edit it. So the place where I go to then approve this exception is I just go into the edit screen of that invoice or that transaction. And up here at the top, it's telling me this transaction has one or more match tolerance exceptions. So it tells me up here that there's something wrong. But down here, as I scroll into the entry lines, it's going to flag whatever lines are causing my overage. So even if this was an invoice with 50 lines on it and there was one line that was more than 5% over, it would flag the entire transaction and it would state exactly which transaction line has the problem. So it's highlighting this one, and it's telling me that there's a price exception on line 1. The price variance is 25%. And my corporate price variance setup is 5%. So there's obviously a problem there. So I have a couple options. I could either adjust the price downward and say, well, I don't care what you're invoicing me. We placed an order for $1 a piece. That's how much we're paying. and then you can fight us on it. You can fight us on it if you'd like. So if I were to have done that, I would just change the price down to $1, hit post, and then you kind of negotiate with your vendor from there. But in this case, let's just say, hey, it's a 25-cent difference. It's $2.50. I'm not going to fight it. So I'm going to go ahead and override my exception that popped up right here. So this one doesn't really give us the ability right now to input comments, but once I hit that button to approve the exception, it moves it into a state of pending. So when it's in a state of pending, it's a posted bill. It hits my general ledger, and I can then pay it. And furthermore, it allows me to convert it down into whatever transaction type I need to in the future. So again, this feature gives you the option to have some type of intervention to figure out, hey, do we want to pay the amount that the vendor is charging us, or do we need to have a conversation with them and say, hey, you need to correct this bill? There's a lot of different ways in which you could remedy this. But the thing I wanted to show you, though, is since we approved of this exception and we did set up the module to post to a dedicated GL account for it, if I go into the posting details of this invoice, you can see that the $10 right here, the original, like the amount of the purchase that it originally was, that posts as a debit to 5305. That's program supplies. But the 250 overage posts to this match tolerances GL account. So again, you may want to allocate it. You may want to get rid of that balance before you issue financials, but having transactions post to a dedicated account allows you to dig into why maybe there was issues with this in the first place. All right. So that was effectively it when it comes to purchase price variances. Any questions in the chat at all?
No questions.
No questions? Okay. All right. All right. So that takes us to the last major addition to this release. And I guess, again, this isn't really unique to this release, as this has been kind of ongoing. But this is just part of an ongoing rollout. This is just the most recent entry into it. Really, with this list view, with this enhanced list view initiative that Intacct is putting on, it really makes the product more intuitive. It allows someone who may not be super familiar with the product to go in and figure out, oh, hey, where do I go to add new columns? Where do I go to filter? Because today, yeah, you have the ability to create custom views, and with custom views, you can pick and choose what columns you want, do filtering, relabel stuff. But you kind of need to have a little bit of training surrounding it. But this new beta interface they're working on makes it a lot easier for users who are brand new to the system to navigate and figure out what to do from here. Bear in mind that these enhanced list views are not available on all list views yet. As a matter of fact, that they've only been rolled out to a relative small handful. The one data object that it's most prominently featured on is the vendors list, and that's what we're going to be working with as part of this demonstration. Over time, they're going to add it to AP bills, stuff like purchasing, AR invoices, things like that. It's just right now, again, it's beta, and because it's in beta, it may not work perfectly, but there is a spot for you to input feedback as well, which we'll talk about later. All right. So again, I'm just going to go through a few of the key features here, and then we'll do a demonstration, and then we should have some time for questions. So as part of this enhanced list view setup, the default filter criteria is contains, not begins with, which is what Intacct list views have today. So that middle image off to the left of the left-hand side of your screen, as you can see, vendor ID, vendor name, address line, all these filters by default are contains. So if I can just type in a word or part of a word and then hit enter, and then it's going to run a search and figure out what in the listing of vendors includes those characters that you just entered in. That's typically a lot more flexible than just searching for stuff that begins with certain criteria. And with the current, soon to be old list views, if you want to do like a contains search quickly, you have to use the %, which serves as a wildcard character. So maybe you knew that, maybe you don't. If you don't, now you do that. Now you do know you can use %signs as a wildcard character. But that's a major change. That's a super welcome change. You have the ability to freeze columns and enable word wrap on certain fields that may be quite long. So it's this is beneficial. So instead of having like a vendor name like this long, you can enable word wrap and then have it condensed down without expanding the size of your list too much. As I said before, these new list views really give you a lot more intuitiveness when it comes to including or excluding columns from your view. You don't have to mess with custom views, although it still supports custom views if you want to use those. But it just makes it a lot more flexible on an ad hoc basis to pick and choose what columns you want, reorder them, all that good stuff. And yep, right there, you have the ability to drag and drop columns and just move those around in the screen itself. And really, it gives you the ability to do some more advanced sorting. So I think the existing list views, they allow you to sort based on one field at a given time. But with these enhanced list views, you can maybe sort by, you can sort by state first, and then sort by city after that, and then sort by name again after that. So there's a lot of flexibility there, a lot of cool stuff. And you can view the vendor listing. This is going to be expanded to other places as well. It's particularly cool with vendors though. But you can view the vendor list in one side of your screen, and then you can see the details of your selected vendor off to the other side on the same screen. So I'll go ahead and show that in a minute so I can properly convey that to you. Let me go ahead and move off of my presentation, move back to my Intacct instance. So as I said before, I'll try not to keep saying it because this is the third time I've said it, but we're going to go ahead and focus on vendors. So one way or another, go ahead and go into your vendors listing. And I accessed it by purchasing, but you can access it by accounts payable as well. There's this link that says turn on list beta interface. I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it's going to take a moment to kind of configure everything, get everything where it needs to go. And it gives me this screen. So this screen right here, this is their vision with what they want to move toward. In the event where you decide, I don't like this right now, I want to wait until they refine it a little bit more, you can just click on the turn off beta switch right here. Or if you have feedback, if you want to send them a note about what you think of this, you can click on send us feedback, and then you can fill out a form where you can leave a comment. All right, so pretty much the main features here that I just wanted to show you is just like what I was talking about before. The default filter criteria for all these fields is now contains. So traditionally, if I wanted to search for something with the word supplies in it, I would have to do something like this. I would have to remember to include %signs. And if I didn't, then I wouldn't be able to find what I'm looking for. But since the filter criteria is by default set to contains, all I have to do is type in the word supplies and then hit enter, and then it pulls up whatever meets that criteria. So I punch in supplies, I see ABC Office Supplies, and I can see all of my columns there. In addition to that, I mean, it still supports, if I click into this filter button right here, it still gives me the ability to do filtering based on equals to, starts with, ends with, does not contain, which can be a lot of fun. Blank is blank, not blank, stuff like that. And the other feature I just wanted to show real quick is traditionally you would have to create a custom view and edit the custom view to move fields around. But with this new setup, all you gotta do is click and drag. So I grabbed total due and I brought it over next to the vendor name. Maybe I want to bring the vendor ID over here instead. So I can get really custom with the way I want my screen. I can build it to what I want, and it can be private to my own setup. And then, like I said before, Intacct is really going for the intuitiveness idea here. So if I click on this icon over here, this little gear icon, there's a little drop down and it allows me to select configure columns. So when I select that, it gives me this big list of things that I can select, a big list of fields I can select. So if I scroll down through here, there's going to be a lot of fields here that you're not really going to care about. But let's just say I don't really care about status. Don't really care about status. I can drop status. All my vendors are in the same country. So let's just say I don't care about pulling in the country code in my view. And tell you what, maybe I'll bring in the routing number for ACH instead and hit apply. There we go. So by simply going into configure columns, it gives me the ability to select additional columns that I want to see. It allows me to take away, it allows me to take away columns I no longer want to see. It allows me to add things like ACH, where now I can see the ACH information for this vendor. And yep, that's a cool new feature. Oh yeah, I was drawing a blank for a moment there. The last thing I wanted to show you that stands out really nicely here, and then we can break for questions, is if I click on split view right here. So right now by default, I have the list view option selected. If I change to split view, what it gives me is it gives me kind of like a picture-in-picture type of concept, where off to the left here, I have a listing of all my vendors. And as I click into my vendors, it's going to show me the actual like vendor card or screen off to the right here. And I can even use my keyboard. I'm moving my hands off the mouse, and I can just kind of arrow down through all of these and look at my vendor setups off to the right here. This is a quick way for me to figure out when the last time I paid each one of these vendors has allows me to see when the last time I paid these vendors was. I can quickly make edits to vendors. Maybe this is if you have a yearly project where you deactivate vendors that you maybe haven't paid in a long time, you can go through this screen rather quickly. All right, we'll go ahead and hit done out of here. And I believe once I hit done, it takes me back to my list view. Yep. All right, so we're about 50 minutes in here. That's pretty much it when it comes to the enhanced list view for vendors. Again, Intacct is working on releasing more and more of these as we go. And but the place where they are most featured right now is on vendors. So am I correct in seeing that we have a couple questions in chat?
We do have one question, yes. Is there a way to search by memo in a bill?
Memo in a bill, so not currently from this screen. I just wanted to look real quick to make sure I wasn't inadvertently giving you wrong information. Okay, yeah. So the answer to your question is no, because when you look at a list view, that list views are looking at header fields. So header fields like vendor, due date, posting date, stuff like that. Memo is technically a line level field. So to answer your question, you'd probably want to whip up a custom report for that. But it's possible that at some point these enhanced list views would incorporate that, but not today. All right.
All right.
Was that all so far?
Yes, that was the only question.
Okay. Very good. Thank you for that question. So really those three features I just showed you are probably the most impactful of the most impactful of the features as part of the release 3 that went live back in August. Again, there's additional features that have been released, but they may be just some small cosmetic changes. There may be some changes for modules that none of you are really using, or that not many of our clients use, like construction or contracts. Not a lot of our clients use those, if any. But pretty much before we conclude here, I did say that I was going to make some mentions to some of the things that have released as part of last Friday on November 10th, and pretty much the number one item here is the ability to receive AR payments and apply to multiple customers. This is one that I've actually been hoping for quite a while. So it's pretty common for Intacct users to provide services to, let's say, apartment groups or school districts and things like that. And there may be several different buildings or several different child customers that an Intacct client may serve. But traditionally, Intacct didn't give you the ability to take a single payment from the parent organization and apply it to multiple customers. But with release 4 that dropped over last week, you now have the ability to do that. So that's super cool to see. Another one is you now have the ability to edit AP bills that have been submitted for approval. Traditionally, the only remedy if you submitted a bill for approval and you realized you made a mistake was you would need the approver to decline it to send it back to you, and then you reprocess with the changes, or you'd have to delete and then start over. But nowadays, with this new release, Intacct gives you the ability to edit those bills prior to, you can edit them if you find that you need to make a change. Bear in mind, though, that this only is available in accounts payable. So it's not currently available in the purchasing module, which some of you may be using. And additional filtering on vendor and customer aging reports. Primarily, it gives you the ability to select multiple vendors instead of a range of vendors, because let's face it, your vendors that you want to group together may be all over the place with their IDs. So this gives you the ability to pick and choose which vendors you want to choose if there's multiple. Then you also have the ability to see a vendor's preferred payment method in the pay bill screen in accounts payable. That's super helpful because it helps to make sure that you're paying them with the correct payment method if they have one. And finally, this last one right here is, as a consultant, I've actually seen this more times than I'd want to, but the ability to prevent posting transactions too far into the future. So it gives you the ability to lock future fiscal and calendar years. I've been doing this for about 8 years now, and there's been on more than one occasion where a reversal gets posted, and it gets posted in the year like 3023 instead of 2023. So the payment gets reversed out 1,000 years from now. And it's not really that big of a problem, but it's kind of annoying and kind of weird to see. But Intacct gives you the ability to lock that down now. So I encourage you all to maybe take a look at that as well, or else you run the risk of accidentally posting something 1,000 years from now. All right. So, questions, comments, concerns from anyone? I think on this copy of the I made a boo-boo on this copy of the PowerPoint. There is a thank you tab with that had my email on it, so I apologize. But any final questions to address as part of this?
No, I don't believe so. We answered the one that came in.
Okay, very good. Well, I think we made it. We're almost at time. We made it 55 minutes in. That's all I had for today. Hopefully that was useful for you all to see. Again, we'll be diving into more detail on the stuff that released as part of release 4. And there may be some changes that are made between now and then that Intacct makes that we'll also incorporate. But Sydney, anything else from you, or anything else from you as part of this?
Just a quick note to add that on Wednesday, November 15th, which will be tomorrow, we will be emailing out a recording of this presentation and the slide deck to all of you. So Wes's contact information will also be in that email. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to him. And I think that wraps it up for today.
All right.
All right.
Very good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.